Okay, just to keep the ball rolling, I'd like to introduce another strong panel for Yukon Women in Mining. Jennie Gjertsen, Manager Sustainability and External Relations Coffee Mine Project for Newmont, Canada. And we have Michelle Dawson-Beattie, Community Relations Liaison for Eagle Gold Mine and Victoria Gold Corp. Thank you.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Michelle's not able to talk today, so you're stuck with me. We are running a half an hour behind, but no one in this room was going to hit that panel off stage. So no surprise. I'm going to try and keep it a little bit more brief than planned so that we can make sure that we get through the content today. And for anyone who attended the full panel before, so many of those themes are going into this work. So Brianne mentioned that I work for Newmont on the coffee project, but I'm the president of Yukon Women in Mining, and today we're going to talk about one of the initiatives that Yukon Women in Mining is taking on, really building on some of the work that Minister McLean was speaking about. Thank you everyone for making it to day 4. So we'll try and get through this. I don't know if any of the panel folks are still in the room, but I did want to thank them, and I have a few takeaways from that discussion. One is the values of inclusivity have been identified, but we're really lacking the structures in place to make it happen everywhere. 2, not a lot of data in the Yukon reference in that discussion, and the reality is it's because the data in the Yukon is either not there or what is there is quite challenging to interpret. And Minister McLean talked about the pathway to prevention and how mining companies can be a part of that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I want to warn everyone that I'm going to say some things today that are uncomfortable. Sometimes when we talk about these issues, we talk about them in platitudes or high-level discussion. And the reality is that unless everyone is talking about what the real issues are on the ground in our communities and in our camps, we can't really solve that problem. I'm going to keep referencing back to safety today. And because I think the mining industry has really figured out how to make safety better in our work sites. And when we think about camp safety around personal safety and we think about community safety, is we take the same approach, the same methodology to how we deal with kind of workplace safety. We'll have the same successes that we've had in the last 30 years in the industry. I also want to say that not everything I say is reflective of the views of all of our membership, potentially even all of our board, but our board has definitely decided that this is a really important issue that we need to move forward on. We decided to tackle this issue because of some of the feedback that we're hearing through the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls reports, recent studies, assessments, broader conversations, and we had some very real feedback from the Yukon Aboriginal Women's Council last year about asking what we were doing as an organization, not just for women who work in mining, but for Yukon women. And it was a really impactful conversation, and I think really forms where we're going to go as an organization to enhance what we're already doing and look at maybe some other issues. So what do we mean by camp safety? What is the current state of things? And what can be done to advance this area? So those are the few questions that I'm going to try and answer today, but also just make everyone think about today. It's tough being a miner these days. I feel like probably someone said that 25 years ago, and we'll continue to say that. But in this round, we have a bunch of different things that are happening, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but these things have been echoed throughout the last 4 days. There's a lot of negative perception out there, or at least we think there is, and there's a lot of changing expectations of what we're doing. This kind of definition about healthy and safe workplaces, the minister addressed the new legislation that came out in 2021 in the Yukon under the Workers' Safety and Compensation Board. This is already here, right? So if you're operating in the Yukon and you are not doing things to address this, it's a great resource, but we should be doing this, right? So Minister McLean talked about that psychological health and safety piece in our work sites. And as I said, I think that we have, as kind of the mining industry, we've really sorted out how to deal with safety issues a little bit better kind of in our workplace, and maybe we understand what's happening in the community. So on the community piece, it's hard to kind of think about what are the impacts of my project, and it doesn't matter if you're a placer mine or you're in exploration or construction or operation. We do know that there's a couple impacts that happen as a result of mining activities. Some of those are increased drug and alcohol use. That can often lead to increased violence and increases in domestic violence. And the presence of organized criminal activities, so organizations involved coming into communities or coming into territories. These are not necessarily fully mining problems, right? These are social concerns that we have in all of our communities. But what mining often does is it adds another layer onto that and adds another level of impact. And it's hard to talk about that, and it's hard to understand what our role is in that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of reflection. I've worked in Yukon mining for 16 years. I spent 10 years doing a 2-and-2 in camps. I've worked in exploration. I've worked in construction, production. And so this is my personal experience and things that I've heard along the way. Well, we don't have anything like that here. We're like a family. If something was happening, we would know about it. We have a policy that deals with harassment. People know about it. I'm the woman in mining, and no one's ever really harassed me. I've never been assaulted. I think it's being blown out of proportion. That was me, by the way. From a general manager, I don't really care what people do on their days off. We can't really control what people do when we aren't paying them. Here's some other things. If you go to that camp, you can pay one of the girls to sleep with you for a carton of cigarettes. We leave $10 on the mattress, and one of them will do our laundry. If you leave a lot more and they take it, you know that someone will come back to your room later that night. We saw 2 underage girls go into the hotel with a guy. I know he is a minor. I can't believe it's happening in our own hotel and with our own citizens. The truck drivers do coke all night to stay awake. That's the barber filming to home a prostitute last night. So I'd like all of you to think. This is a very well-attended conference. We've had a wonderful 4 days here. I think there's over 600 people in attendance. And it's really been wonderful. We've been talking about collaboration, listening to and respecting our communities, and I'll ask, do you think that anyone attending this conference has purchased and used an illicit drug in the time that we've had here? Do you think that anyone has gone home with a young Indigenous woman after buying her drinks all night, blurring the lines of consent? I'm a bit ashamed to say that earlier in my career, I kind of accepted some of this stuff. I maybe thought, it is what it is, it's not my site, I don't work with them, maybe it's just a rumor. They're on their days off. But I think we can accept that if that's my experience, and this is not 25 years ago, I mean, I've been working a long time, but some of this is more recent than that. And And I've worked for companies and leaders who I have respected, and yet this has still been my experience. So, what is the data telling us, and how big an issue is this? I asked, do you think that there's anyone in this conference? And maybe there has been. Maybe it's only one person. And I think the question is, does it matter if it's only one person? And why don't we just acknowledge that it's a problem and we can be doing more? I think that there's a lot of studies that are being done across Canada in this sector. There's been some things done regionally, and the robustness of that social science is not there. I'm not a social scientist, but I'm a scientist, and it's really hard as a scientist not to look at, how many people were involved and who they were and say, that probably isn't accurate. But I think for me, where I have really changed my perspective is it doesn't matter. We'll get there on the data, there'll be better studies, there'll be better results, but ultimately, there's no reason to wait for the data to tell us if we think that it's already happening. And if we're talking to communities and we're talking to organizations that work in communities, and we think that there's a chance it's happening, there's allegations against companies, in the media, and you can see that there's things like sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations. We don't need the data to corroborate everything. We can start taking action now. It's really hard. Minister McLean mentioned Coffey's recommendation report, and it's hard to hear that your project's going to have significant adverse effects without a bunch of mitigations. And my first reaction, of course, is like, where's the data to back that up? And the reality is, I've come to recognize, well, that's not the question. Here's another example of what the data is telling us. For those of you who aren't aware, Rio Tinto did a review within our company. There's a lot of reports coming out of some of our operations in Australia. This is also after the destruction of the heritage, the archaeological site, and a lot of complaints were coming within the organization around racism and sexual harassment. And they conducted, an external party came in and conducted a really extensive review of company practices with a ton of surveys and interviews. And I don't think you can argue that this data is not robust. And I think the only thing you can argue with Rio Tinto. It's not us. They operate other places. It's not the Yukon. But here's some of the data. We have close to 40% of women in one of the age brackets who've experienced sexual harassment, and 21 women reported sexual assault. We have people who've experienced racism. There's comments about systemic racism, culture of silence, a culture of fear being reporting. When it comes to inclusivity, a fear of coming out to your colleagues, and yet still being treated differently before you come out. And I don't think that we need to think that this is a Rio Tinto problem. I will say that, I work for Newmont, and I'm really proud to say that Newmont basically took this report and said, let's not replicate it, let's just assume that all the findings are exactly what's happening in our company. And start working towards actions to improve it. And I think that's what we need to be doing. Kudos for Rio for making it so transparent, and I think that we can also learn lessons about transparency in that. So what can we do? I think that collectively we can acknowledge that there's an issue. There's an issue in our work camps, and there's an issue of our impacts on communities. Codes of conduct are very powerful. I work for a company where we have a code of conduct, and sometimes codes of conduct really just are just nebulous, high-level, sweeping statements, but they can be utilized. They can be implemented in a way that says, if you don't behave the way that we are outlining, you are choosing not to work for this company. And you gotta sit by it. policies on respect in the workplace, on bullying, harassment, on discrimination, on activities in the community are excellent, and they are the right place to start, but they have to be implemented. If you are appending policies to the back of an employment offer, or you are sending them on the back of a purchase order to the vendor and expecting that the people working at your site know what's in those policies, you are hitting yourself. And if it's a passive passes responsibility and accountability on to another party, it's not good enough. So we need to make sure our policies are implemented, that people are trained on them, that there's avenues for reporting that people feel safe to do. We need to do training, and we need to have that space for these difficult conversations. I know this is hard, but not that long ago, it was hard to raise a safety issue with your boss. And it shouldn't be that way. And this should be exactly the same. There should be a culture of being okay with having these conversations, because in building that, you build that culture of safety and being in it together, and that translates to being respectful of communities and each other in the workforce. I also want to mention things like, these are the easy ones, right? These are free. It doesn't cost anything. The hardest cost here is if you have a bad actor, you get rid of them and you replace them. And I know that costs money, and it might be lost production, whether it's on the drill or in the pit, but I guarantee you will lose other people if you don't address these issues, because they will not want to work for you. I think that as operators, particularly as we have profits rolling in, that we think more around community enhancement. I know that's hard to do sometimes at a junior level, it's season to season, but really thinking about where can we have those community enhancements. And we do that by having this network, right? We don't need to do this alone. We need to wrap in, again, if I think about this being like safety culture, this is how we do it, right? But our network is up a little bit broader when we talk about these issues. Instead of just talking to our workers and our contractors and our company leaders and having that consistency across the organization, we now wrap in First Nation governments into those conversations. We wrap in our NGOs that are doing such great work in the community. We wrap in our governments. And we need to change the culture, and culture change takes time, but if anyone's ever worked at a site and seen that culture change evolve on safety, the same thing can happen here. Talk to your communities. And if there's people in this room who maybe don't have an avenue to talk to a First Nation government, or a First Nation government might not have the capacity or the willingness to talk about some of these conversations because they are challenging. There are so many resources within the territory, within government, within like transition society, where you can gain a broader understanding. I would expect that if you went to the Women's Transition Society and you said, I want to understand what some of the challenges are in Whitehorse, and not letting a consultant go have that conversation for a baseline report, but going and having that conversation as a leader within your company, you can then take that information, educate your people who maybe aren't from here, and really start driving some of that change. There's a bunch of good resources out here. You don't need to hear me say it. This is not, there's an evolving landscape on a number of things around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Minister McLean talks about the implementation plan, the MMIWG2S+ implementation plan. It's a great report. It's an easy read. It's well laid out. The Mining Association of Canada has a couple of new protocols out. Really good place to start. You don't have to be a member of the Mining Association of Canada to implement those protocols. MIR, the Mining Industry Human Resources Council, for, again, huge amount of resources with that entity that is probably underutilized, in my opinion, across the industry. They've released Safe Workplaces for All in 2022, and have, in the last month, released integrating ADI, addressing systemic barriers in Canadian mining. Other than Squamish, and wood fiber LNG has just been required to produce a gender and cultural safety management plan. Really looking forward to seeing that, because I think as we all are on the cutting edge of this stuff, we're going to find there's no sense on reinventing the wheel here. We can, like we do for all sorts of other things in our industry, borrow the things that other people are doing that are working and implement them. So what's next? I mentioned that Yukon women mining. Obviously, I think this is important enough that we wanted to do to talk about it at Geoscience. But we really think that some value is going to come in with holding a forum. So we want to do a forum. We're hoping to do it in Q1 of next year. We want to bring together industry. We want to bring together government. We want to bring together First Nation governments and representatives, community organizations, and have a conversation like this, understand what the state of the industry is in, and really create guidance about where we should go. And then we're hoping to create a document that is a document for industry about kind of summarizing all this stuff so that you can kind of have a resource to look to around developing policies, implementation of training, and then a bunch of ideas that I've not thought of because that's the value of a forum. So hopefully a guidance document comes out of it. I would encourage anyone who would like to be a part of that, whether in participation or in support of it, to contact anyone on our board, and we'll make sure that we'll be sending you information. And with that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jennie. That was really well done. I'd like to now invite up again to join us on stage, Naileen Morin, Vice President, Sustainability of Skeena Resources.